Hey everyone, my name is Amy Upham, and I am a Master's in Public Health student at Lenore University. And today I'm going to be talking about some of the socio-political variables in the Democratic Republic of the Congo's Ebola outbreak, which began last year and has continued and escalated this year. So the Democratic Republic of the Congo, just to give some context, is located in central sub-Saharan Africa. It's bordered on the east by the Congo River, Rwanda, Uganda, and Tanzania. This becomes important when we talk about the Ebola outbreak, so that's why I'm only mentioning those bordering countries. It's 55% rural, and nearly 90% of its population is younger than 44. The rural piece is important because in the 2014 Ebola outbreak, a lot of the reason that it was able to be contained was because of landmass borders, natural borders. And so that was the rural piece of that. As it says here, transportation and telecommunications infrastructure in rural areas is very poor. So that was actually a benefit in 2014, but can also be a detriment. The history of the Democratic Republic of the Congo is important when looking at the Ebola outbreak because there are so many socio-political variables that are going into making this the second worst Ebola outbreak in the world. The Atlantic slave trade in the 16th century made Democratic Republic of the Congo vulnerable to its neighbors. So there had always been, sort of warlords and fights for property and that kind of thing. But the fact that the slave trade came in and made it so much more profitable, and that profit was off of the backs of human beings, meant that the territorial wars and the wars for power became much more severe and much more nasty. And so that's when the country really fell into a state of instability that it hasn't actually come out of. Belgium conquered it in the 19th century. They did their thing where they take a lot of power and land and money. One of the biggest exports from the Democratic Republic of Congo are mining, so diamonds and that kind of thing. The DRC finally gained independence in 1960 from Belgium. They were not that they were not ready for independence. They, had not governed themselves in a long time. And so a dictator, Mobutu, was able to come in very quickly. Within a few years, he took over and renamed the country Zaire. His reign ended in 1997. Zaire stands for the Great River, I believe. And he called his movement the Authenticity Movement. So he was trying to align himself with rebel forces. But I think they got wise after many, many years of him basically having a patronage system where, the people that he paid did what he said to do. And a lot of that was military action against his own people. His reign ended in 1997. Part of that was just because he got really sick and died. And the country took back the name Democratic Republic of the Congo. Very shortly thereafter, again, not having experience governing themselves, a civil war immediately broke out. At the same time, the Rwandan war was also spilling over into the East Congo, so the Hutu and Tutsi, and if you've heard anything about that, millions, I believe, died in that war. And then in the Republic of the Congo, 3 million people were killed over 4 to 6 years. That did include infighting of folks that were DRC. Another military power under Kabila took power until 2019. The first Kabila died in, I think it was 2001, and that's when his son Joseph took over, who was much better than Mobutu, but still not a democratic, acknowledgement of power. And so that didn't happen until January of 2019. The current president, Tshisekedi, and there's some concerns about him too and how he got to power and whether it was a really fair election, but it was an election. It was the first peaceful transfer of democratic power in the history of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, at least as far as we know. So as you can imagine, all of that instability would not make for a good fertile ground for wiping out an epidemic. So the Ebola outbreak of 2018-19, like I said, has been the second worst in history in Africa. So just a little bit about Ebola. You probably know this, but it's a virus, has an average 50% mortality rate. Last year in the DRC, it was 61% mortality. The epidemic right now is centered in the eastern Congo, near the Rwandan border and the Congo River. It is transmitted by bodily fluids and some mammals, so bats and chimpanzees, and I've heard antelopes and porcupines. So just random bodily fluids of these animals, or if they bite you. And it can, after somebody is treated, it's not cured, but if they're treated and they live, it can live in their semen and vaginal secretions. So sexual protection becomes really important. As of July 31st, 2,713 people have contracted it, and July 17th, it was declared a public health emergency by the World Health Organization. The World Health Organization has largely led the response. They facilitated $170,000 or 170,000 administrations of the Merck vaccine, which has not passed all the stages of research, but it showed a lot of promise in the 2015 Guinea Ebola outbreak. And so it showed actually 100% protection. And so they're using it. And there was a second vaccine Johnson & Johnson attempted to research and test. And the health minister at the time said no. He really just wanted the Merck vaccine because it works. And he didn't want his people who were already really mistrustful in Eastern Congo to be confused. I kind of feel for the guy. I've been studying this and looking at this. I'm wondering if he's not correct, but in any case, the president of DRC, Tshisekedi, relieved the health minister of his oversight of Ebola, and now is having a local biomedical university, one of the major cities, take over oversight. And the health minister resigned actually after that happened. So the complications here on the right, you see the graph of the increase in death. So every month since August of 2018, more people have contracted the disease, and more people have died, obviously, because it's very fatal. So what's making it so hard to treat, right? We have this vaccine that's 100% effective, or what's making it so hard to prevent is that the organization is being disrupted by the inter-country violence. A lot of it's pitted towards healthcare facilities. In Eastern Congo specifically, there's a lot of mistrust of government and Western medicine. The WHO has, begging for funding. The United States froze most of its $200 million for this effort. In fact, a lot of the money that the CDC has spent on research in the United States, because they haven't yet gone into the endemic center. A lot of the money they've spent was actually old money from another outbreak several years ago that they just didn't spend, and it was sitting there in their account. So there's no new money from the U.S. really going into this right now, which is hard because the CDC and USAID are really two of the major international players when it comes to eradicating these large outbreaks. And then there's disbelief in Ebola. People just don't believe. They think it's the government telling them a lie because they've had so many government takeovers and coups, and understandably. And then, of course, the transition of power, who's in charge, right? So I think the biggest thing I want to get into here is the violence, because that just makes it impossible, right? You can work on trust, you can work on other things, but when somebody sets fire to a 70-bed facility like they did in Katwa in February 2019, Doctors Without Borders had to shut it down. There's nothing they can do about that. In April 2019, a very respected doctor from Cameroon, I believe, Dr. Richard Valerie Muzoko Kibon, was killed in a staff meeting in Butembo. So he was in a staff meeting, and in fact, one of the assailants who came in to kill him shouted, Ebola is false, or something like that, just like Ebola doesn't exist. You made up this disease. And so they're using this as political warfare. And then there was attack on the city center at Butembo just a month later near the World Health Organization, which shut the World Health Organization down for a few days. And they're the ones that coordinating the effort, right? So this is huge. And then I also put in here the rampant sexual assault of and by women. And the reason why this is important is because the disease can live in the bodily fluids, right? And so if 40% of women are experiencing sexual assault, which in 2010 anyway, when there was a large survey done, that was the rate. Also, they measured the rate of women who are forced to commit sexual violence against others in the name of war, and that was 41% of women. So we have people raping, people being raped, upwards of almost half the population, and that is going to continue the spread of the disease. Lastly, I wish I was ending on a hopeful note. This is my last presentation for my whole master's program. But right now, there isn't a hopeful note in this, but there is an ironic twist, which is that Rwanda temporarily closed its borders to the DRC a couple days ago after word of 3 deaths in Goma. So Goma is a city on the east coast on the Congo River with 1.2 million people. And an individual and his wife and daughter all contracted it and died. And so they're really scared because it's this huge city that it could spread quickly. And that would be devastating, right? Like the barrier in the 2014-15 was that it never reached those big cities, but now it has. So Rwanda temporarily closed their borders. And the reason why it's ironic is because it was the Rwandan Civil War that spilled over several years ago and contributed to the disorder of the area, which has caused so much mistrust and violence and whatnot. So the CDC has finally sent a contingent to Goma. They sent them yesterday, which is the anniversary of the start of the epidemic. It's just 12 people. They're just in Goma. They're also CDC headquarters in Kashinsky, which is the capital of Democratic Republic of the Congo, but that's not close to the epicenter. Goma is getting a little closer. They don't yet want to send anybody into the endemic areas of Butembo and Beni and that area in Kabwa because of the violence. Hopefully the U.S. will put some funding behind it. This is just something that we're going to have to keep an eye on. It's coming up in the news now every day because it seems like it's getting really hard to get a handle on it. So hopefully we can assist from the United States. And that is my presentation. Thanks so much. Appreciate it. Have a good one.